Turbulence in the relationship between Canada and the U.S. continues to drive down travel to the U.S.
Comes for vacation, I think there's other places I would rather go.
When international travel to the U.S. fell last year, many blamed the so-called Trump slump, arguing that the president's low approval ratings overseas are to blame for the drop in tourism.
There's an eerie silence spreading across America's skies in 2025, one that almost nobody wants to talk about. Airports that were once overflowing with tourists, buzzing with energy, and alive with the sound of rolling suitcases now echo with emptiness. At first glance, it looks like just a temporary slump. But when you look closer, the truth is far more alarming. For decades, the United States was the undisputed king of global tourism. Every traveler's dream, whether it was a student chasing the American summer, a family saving for that once-in-a-lifetime trip to Disney, or retirees escaping the cold to bask in the Florida sun. The world came here in waves. Planes from every continent touched down on American soil daily, carrying millions of people who wanted to taste the so-called American dream. But suddenly, that dream is fading. And the shocking part? It's not because the rest of the world suddenly became more attractive. It's not because Europe or Asia suddenly reinvented themselves. The truth is, travelers are abandoning the United States because stepping foot here feels less like a vacation and more like a gamble. Sky-high ticket prices, chaotic airports, endless visa red tape, and the creeping sense of instability have turned the once coveted trip to America into a stressful maze that many would rather avoid. And while the U.S. struggles with these problems, other destinations are stepping in to take its place, offering cheaper flights, smoother paperwork, and the kind of hospitality America seems to have lost. The result? A wave of airlines, some of them giants, others beloved by budget travelers, are quietly pulling their planes out of the United States. No press conferences, no goodbyes, just vanishing routes, canceled tickets, and empty gates where thousands of travelers once passed through. This isn't just another story about travel numbers. This is about trust, reputation, and America's standing in the world. Because when even loyal neighbors, trusted allies, and longtime partners decide the U.S. is no longer worth flying to, it signals a shift far bigger than tourism. It signals a change in how the world sees America itself. So today, we're diving into the chilling story of 6 airlines that have abandoned the United States in 2025, leaving behind deserted airports, frustrated travelers, and a question that no one seems willing to answer. Is America's time as the world's favorite destination coming to an end? It started with a whisper, so quiet that almost nobody noticed at first. PLAY Airlines, the low-cost carrier from Iceland that had once opened the skies to an entire generation of budget travelers, simply disappeared from the United States. No warnings, no heartfelt farewell message, not even a press release to explain what went wrong. One morning in March 2025, all of its U.S. routes were just gone. For thousands of travelers, it was like the rug had been pulled out from under them. Students who had been planning summer jobs in Boston, young backpackers who saved every cent to finally touch down in New York City, families hoping to visit relatives in the U.S. All of them woke up to find their tickets erased, their travel dreams shattered overnight. And this wasn't just any airline. PLAY Airlines was special because it was a bridge. It was the affordable link that allowed young Europeans to experience America firsthand, sometimes for less than $100 a ticket. Remember those legendary $99 flights from Reykjavik to Boston? For many, they weren't just cheap seats. They were golden keys to adventure, cross-country road trips, student exchanges, or that long-awaited selfie in Times Square. But when PLAY pulled out of the U.S., that bridge collapsed. According to the U.S. Travel Association, Arrivals from Northern Europe plummeted by more than 60% in less than a year. That's not a decline. That's a freefall. Tens of thousands of seats that used to be filled every single month now sit completely empty. Routes that once buzzed with energy, laughter, and anticipation suddenly feel erased from history. And behind the numbers lies something far more troubling: a shift in mindset. A new survey from the European Travel Commission revealed that 71% of Nordic travelers now choose Canada or Japan instead of America. Why? It's not just about airfare. It's about risk. Travelers worry about social unrest. They worry about what happens if they need medical care in the U.S., where even a minor accident can cost thousands of dollars. They worry about feeling alone in an emergency without proper support. One veteran tour guide in Reykjavik put it bluntly: "I used to bring hundreds of people to New York every single month. They were excited. For them, it was the trip of a lifetime. But now, I tell them to go to Tokyo or Vancouver instead. America feels like a gamble these days. You might get an amazing experience, or you might end up with a costly mess, and nobody wants to take that risk anymore." The contrast is painful. In 2015, the U.S. was the #1 dream destination for Northern Europeans. Fast forward to 2025, and applications for U.S. visas in Iceland have dropped nearly 48%. Meanwhile, applications for Canada and South Korea have more than doubled. This isn't just about losing cheap flights. It's about losing goodwill. The quiet disappearance of Play Airlines represents something much bigger: the collapse of trust from an entire generation of travelers who once saw America as the place where dreams came true. And if budget airlines, the carriers that fueled student adventures, family reunions, and cultural exchanges, are abandoning America, then the warning signs couldn't be clearer. Because if young travelers are saying no to the U.S. now, they may never come back in the future. But this wasn't just a European story. What came next hit even closer to home. America's most loyal neighbor, Canada, started turning its back as well. If the collapse of Play Airlines shocked Europe, what happened next struck even closer to home. And for America, it was perhaps the most painful blow of all. Because in 2025, not just one, but both of Canada's largest airlines, Air Canada and WestJet, slashed more than 40% of their flights to the United States. And these weren't minor routes to small airports. No, these were lifelines: New York, Las Vegas, Orlando, Los Angeles, cities that for decades had been part of the Canadian tradition. For generations, it was almost a ritual. Young families heading to Disney World, retirees flying down to Florida to escape the brutal winters, and the snowbird community treating America like their second home. But in 2025, that tradition cracked wide open. For the first time in history, Canada was running more domestic flights than flights heading into America. To put it bluntly, Canadians were turning inward, exploring their own country, or heading south to Mexico instead. The numbers tell the story. Canadian bookings to the U.S. dropped by 53% in just 1 year. And while America's airports emptied, flights to places like British Columbia, Nova Scotia, and Mexico's sunny beaches began to boom. And here's the kicker: it's not about affordability. It's not that Canadians can't afford to travel to the U.S. anymore. It's that they don't trust the experience. Take Los Angeles, for example. A mid-range downtown hotel can cost $150 per night, before you even add the $60 for parking, and the mountain of hidden fees that inflate your bill. Compare that to the same amount in Quebec or British Columbia, where you get a lakeside resort, full breakfast service, and, most importantly, peace of mind. One mother from Ottawa summed it up best when she told the CBC, "We used to think of the U.S. as our backyard, A quick trip, no stress. But now, I don't feel safe taking my kids there anymore. That feeling isn't unique. A recent survey revealed that 69% of Canadians over the age of 50 now believe the U.S. is no longer a safe destination. Nearly half of those who once traveled to America in the past decade say they have no plans to return anytime soon. Think about that for a second. Canada isn't just another market. It's America's most important international partner when it comes to tourism. Close by, easy to travel, culturally connected. If even Canada, the neighbor who knows the U.S. better than anyone, is losing faith, what does that say to the rest of the world? Because for decades, the flow of Canadians into the United States wasn't just tourism. It was a bond. It was a tradition that symbolized closeness and trust. But now, that trust has cracked. And when your closest neighbor, the one who treated your country like their own backyard, decides it's not worth stepping across the border anymore, that's no longer just a tourism issue. That's a mirror reflecting something far bigger. The United States isn't just being skipped because of money. It's being skipped because in the eyes of ordinary Canadians, America has become too chaotic, too unstable, too unpredictable. And if even your most loyal neighbor is turning away, what about your longtime allies across the Atlantic? The answer came quickly, and it shocked the world. Germany's flagship airline, Lufthansa, began pulling its planes out of America too. If Canada's retreat felt personal, what came next rattled America's aviation industry to its core. Because when Lufthansa, the pride of Germany and one of the most respected airlines in the world, decided to quietly shrink its U.S. footprint, it sent shockwaves far beyond the travel industry. For decades, Lufthansa symbolized precision, discipline, and reliability. Its flights between Frankfurt and major American cities weren't just routes. They were historic bridges, running uninterrupted for more than 40 years. Frankfurt to Chicago, Frankfurt to Miami, Frankfurt to Atlanta. These weren't just destinations, they were arteries of transatlantic connection, carrying business leaders, tourists, and families alike. But in 2025, those bridges began to crumble. Overnight, passengers trying to book those once reliable flights discovered something unthinkable. The routes were gone. No announcements, no press conferences, no explanation. Just a silent erasure, as if these links to America had never existed at all. Why would Germany's flagship airline take such a drastic step? The answer, according to insiders, is brutally simple. America no longer makes sense. A Lufthansa strategy executive explained it bluntly to German media. We're not leaving because we dislike America. We're leaving because the numbers don't add up. Costs are exploding, security risks are rising, and the passenger experience has become a burden rather than a benefit. Three major factors drove the retreat. Currency fluctuations that pushed operating costs higher than ever. Soaring airport fees in the U.S., which made tickets uncompetitive compared to Asia. Escalating security concerns, from street protests and rising urban crime to chaotic immigration checkpoints that left both crew and passengers dreading their arrival. And the numbers only confirmed it. Passenger traffic from Europe to the U.S. dropped 24% in 2024 alone, while flights from Europe to Asia surged at their fastest pace in over a decade. For the first time since World War II, the United States was no longer Lufthansa's top priority. Instead, all its resources, the newest planes, the best crews, and the most coveted time slots, were redirected east to Tokyo, Seoul, Delhi, and Singapore. To many inside Lufthansa, the contrast was undeniable. A veteran pilot summed it up perfectly. Flying to Tokyo or Delhi is a relief. Everything runs smoothly, calmly, with respect. Flying to Houston or New York? Flashing police lights, overpriced taxis, endless immigration checks, and passengers treated like suspects. If even the crew dreads going to America, imagine how the passengers must feel. This wasn't a minor business adjustment. It was a historic pivot. Lufthansa, a symbol of German caution and meticulous calculation, doesn't make decisions lightly. For them to walk away from America wasn't just about money. It was about the future. And when Germany's largest airline, a carrier that had once considered the U.S. its crown jewel, decides that flying to America is no longer worth it, the message to the rest of Europe is deafening. Because Lufthansa wasn't alone. Soon after, another European giant, Air France (KLM), made its own heartbreaking decision to cut ties with America. If Lufthansa's retreat felt cold and calculated, what happened with Air France (KLM) carried the weight of something more emotional, almost like a regretful farewell to a long, complicated relationship. For decades, Air France and KLM weren't just airlines. They were cultural ambassadors. Their routes across the Atlantic weren't only about connecting cities, they connected worlds. Paris to New York, Amsterdam to Miami, Paris to Houston. These weren't just flights. They were symbols of economic, cultural, and even romantic ties between Europe and America. But in early 2025, travelers searching for those familiar flights were met with a shocking reality. They were gone. Air France KLM had quietly reduced its U.S. flights by a staggering 30 to 45%. Legendary routes that had survived oil crises, recessions, and even the pandemic disappeared without ceremony. Instead, the airline's energy shifted elsewhere. Flights to Tokyo, Seoul, Singapore, and Mumbai didn't just increase in frequency, they were prioritized. Primetime slots, brand new Airbus A350s, and Boeing 787s, and the most experienced crews were all reassigned eastward. The message couldn't be clearer. The U.S. was no longer the crown jewel. It had been demoted to a symbolic option. For those inside the company, the change carried a painful honesty. A veteran Air France captain admitted to French media, "Flying to New York was my dream when I first started this career. It felt like the ultimate destination. But today, I breathe a sigh of relief when I'm assigned to Tokyo or Seoul instead. The difference is night and day, and what he described matches what countless passengers have felt. Flying to Asia often feels like an extension of the vacation itself. Calm, orderly, luxurious. Flying to the U.S., passengers describe it as stressful, unpredictable, and exhausting. Immigration checkpoints that drag on for hours. Sudden rule changes that leave travelers confused. The constant fear of lost luggage. And beyond the airport walls, the instability of American cities themselves, from random protests to rising street crime. The numbers told the story just as harshly. Air France KLM's flights to the U.S. saw their load factor drop below 70%, a dangerous threshold in aviation where profitability evaporates. Meanwhile, their flights to Asia exceeded forecasts, with many routes running at 90 to 95% capacity, nearly sold out on every flight. The contrast is more than just statistics. It's perception. Once, a trip from Paris to New York was marketed as glamorous, exciting, and iconic. Today, many European travelers quietly compare it to a gamble, a risk, a trip filled with hassles rather than memories. The symbolism here is enormous. Paris is the world's capital of tourism. For generations, the French held a special cultural fascination with America, from jazz and cinema to New York's skyscrapers. But when even Paris begins to pull away, when Air France no longer treats America as a priority, that sends a message to the entire tourism world. The shine has faded. And perhaps That's what makes Air France-KLM's retreat so devastating. Lufthansa may have left with calculation, but Air France left with disappointment. It wasn't just a shift in business strategy, it was the quiet acknowledgement that America is no longer worth the trouble. And if the pillars of European aviation are stepping away, what about airlines from the other side of the globe? The ones that once saw America as the ultimate adventure? The answer came swiftly and harshly, as one of the Pacific's most iconic carriers, Jetstar, made a decision that stunned even its most loyal passengers. If Europe's retreat was shocking, the decision from the other side of the Pacific carried a different kind of weight, one that felt almost like betrayal. Because in 2025, Jetstar, Australia's beloved low-cost carrier and a symbol of youthful adventure, completely withdrew from the United States. This wasn't just a cutback. This was a clean break. Los Angeles, San Francisco, Honolulu, destinations that once defined Jetstar's trans-Pacific ambitions, vanished overnight. For the first time since its founding, Jetstar said goodbye to the United States, wiping the world's biggest tourism market off its map. And for Australians, this hurt deeply. Because Jetstar wasn't just another airline. It was the bridge that made America feel within reach. The Sydney-Los Angeles route in particular had become legendary. Affordable enough for students and young dreamers, adventurous enough to spark lifelong memories, it carried millions of Australians to U.S. soil over the years. For many, stepping off that flight wasn't just travel. It was a cultural connection, a rite of passage. But by 2025, that connection was gone. And the reasons weren't sugar-coated. Jetstar's CEO delivered a blunt assessment at a press conference. Visa procedures are a nightmare. Our passengers are exhausted by the way they're treated at U.S. airports. It feels less like arriving in a welcoming country and more like being interrogated. Behind those words was years of frustration. In 2025 alone, U.S. airports increased landing fees by 38%, making flights more expensive than ever. At the same time, visa processes dragged on, often with endless paperwork and long delays. And when travelers finally made it through the maze, many were met with heavy-handed security that left them feeling like suspects rather than guests. For older Australians, the retirees and loyal repeat visitors, the sting was even sharper. They had spent decades flying to America for holidays, family visits, and once-in-a-lifetime trips. But now, they felt unwelcome. Complaints piled up. Lack of assistance for seniors at airports, emergency medical costs so high they bordered on financial ruin, and even language barriers, ironically, in a country that also speaks English. One retired couple from Melbourne recalled a bitter experience in 2019 that stuck with them forever. We were held for 2 hours at Los Angeles Airport over a simple passport mix-up. We weren't treated like tourists. We weren't even treated like people. We felt like criminals just for traveling. From that day forward, we swore never to return. That attitude is spreading. Australians have a reputation for being polite, loyal, and generous travelers. But when they lose faith in a destination, they don't make noise, they don't stage protests. They simply stop coming back. Quietly, permanently. And that is the most dangerous part for America. Losing Australians isn't just losing a tourism market. It's losing a cultural bridge, a loyal customer base that has historically sustained flows of visitors for decades. Once that trust is broken, it can take years, sometimes an entire generation, to rebuild. And in some cases, it may never return at all. For America, Jetstar's exit wasn't just another airline pulling out. It was a warning sign that loyalty, once taken for granted, had finally run out. And if airlines from halfway around the world were abandoning America, what about airlines inside the country itself? The most painful cut was yet to come. From within America's own borders, as JetBlue and other domestic carriers began erasing U.S. cities from the aviation map. If foreign airlines abandoning the United States was a shock, what came next cut even deeper, because it came from within America itself. In 2025, JetBlue, once hailed as the rising star of U.S. aviation and admired for its friendly service, carried out the largest retreat in the company's history. Entire airports disappeared from its route map overnight. Cities like Syracuse, Worcester, Kansas City, and Fresno, gone. For the travelers who relied on those routes, it wasn't just an inconvenience. It felt like abandonment. Imagine living in a small town where the single daily JetBlue flight wasn't just a way to travel. It was a lifeline. It connected students to universities, patients to specialized doctors, business owners to national markets, and families to loved ones across the country. And suddenly, that lifeline snapped. And JetBlue wasn't alone. A wave of other domestic carriers began quietly downsizing as well. The reasons weren't hard to find. Fuel prices had risen more than 40% since 2022, crushing profit margins. Staffing shortages spread across the industry: pilots, mechanics, flight attendants, even baggage handlers. Escalating airport chaos, delays, security scares, and incidents that made both crews and passengers dread flying. The result was a hollowing out of America's skies. According to the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, within just 1 year, 38% of small airports in the U.S. lost more than half their daily flights. Think about that. Nearly 4 out of 10 small airports suddenly went from being vibrant hubs of connection to ghost terminals with empty gates and silent runways. The impact on ordinary people has been devastating. One former JetBlue pilot from Ohio recalled the change with heartbreak. "I used to fly across more than 30 states. In small towns, people would cheer just because they saw a plane land. It meant they weren't forgotten. Now those flights are gone, and what's left behind is an emptiness you can't describe." That emptiness is more than symbolic. Seniors in small towns can no longer fly to see specialists in bigger cities. Students struggle to reach out-of-state universities. Local businesses lose access to the broader economy, cut off from the opportunities that air travel once made possible. And that's the tragedy. When flights vanish, so do opportunities. For generations, air travel was the engine of the American dream, the thing that made distance shrink, that made ambition possible. But as JetBlue and others pull out, the aviation map of America itself is shrinking. And with it, so too is the promise that America once held for its own citizens. This isn't just about canceled flights. It's about something far bigger. Because when even America's own airlines no longer see value in connecting the country, it raises a haunting question. Is the American dream itself starting to disappear? And that brings us back to the bigger picture, the collapse of trust, loyalty, and reputation that's spreading across the skies. From Iceland to Canada, Germany to France, Australia to America's own heartland, the same message keeps echoing. Fewer planes, fewer passengers, fewer reasons to choose the United States. But is this just temporary turbulence? Or is it the beginning of a permanent shift in global travel? One where America is no longer the center of the world, but a destination fading into the background? 6 airlines, 6 departures. And yet, what we've just uncovered is about so much more than canceled flights or empty airports. It's about the slow unraveling of a reputation that once seemed untouchable. For decades, the United States wasn't just another destination, it was the destination. The crown jewel of global tourism. From Europe to Asia to Oceania, millions of people dreamed of coming here, of touching the American soil they'd seen in movies, of walking the streets of New York, driving across Route 66, or catching the lights of Las Vegas. America wasn't just a country, it was an idea, a dream. But in 2025, that dream is cracking. Play Airlines, once a lifeline for young Europeans, quietly disappeared, leaving Northern Europe's travelers disillusioned. Canada, America's closest neighbor and most loyal partner, is turning inward, with families and retirees openly saying the U.S. no longer feels safe. Lufthansa, the cautious titan of Germany, decided America is no longer worth the cost. Air France-KLM, once proud to fly across the Atlantic, now breathes easier when sending crews to Asia. Jetstar, the adventurous spirit of Australia, walked away in disappointment, ending decades of cultural exchange. And finally, JetBlue and other U.S. airlines themselves are retreating, abandoning their own people, their own towns, their own skies. Each story carries its own sting. But together, they form a chilling picture. The United States, once the epicenter of global aviation, is quietly being erased from the map of international trust. And here's the truth. This isn't just about tourism, it's about perception. It's about how the world now views America, not as a dream, but as a gamble. Not as the land of promise, but as a place of rising costs, endless red tape, and unpredictable risks. Think about the symbolism. Airports that once symbolized opportunity now echo with silence. Routes that once connected families, cultures, and economies now sit erased, as if they never existed. And passengers, once thrilled at the thought of stepping into America, now quietly choose Canada, Japan, or Europe instead. The question we're left with is haunting. Is this just a moment of turbulence, a storm that America can ride out? Or is this the start of something far more permanent? A new era where the United States, once the world's favorite destination, slowly fades into the background as other nations step forward with smoother travel, safer streets, and friendlier skies. Because if even America's allies, neighbors, and its own airlines no longer see value in the journey, then perhaps the bigger story isn't just about aviation. Perhaps it's about the American dream itself, shrinking, retreating, and slowly vanishing from view. And as we watch the skies above America grow quieter, one question lingers. Will this nation find a way to rebuild its place in the world's imagination? Or will the empty terminals of 2025 become the permanent symbol of a country that lost its wings?